stubby beer bottles, Dominion's legendary meat counters, and the unmistakable smell of the original Tim Hortons. These aren't just forgotten relics of 1960s Canada, they're the building blocks of our national identity. As these 8 cultural touchstones disappeared one by one, did we lose something essential about what it meant to be Canadian? Or are they simply the price we paid for progress? Coming in at number 8, a humble icon that once filled the hands of Canadians coast to coast, the stubby beer bottle. That distinctive sound when you cracked one open after a long day wasn't just the promise of refreshment, it was the soundtrack of Canadian leisure time. Introduced in 1962, these squat 300-ml glass vessels were deliberately designed to be both practical and patriotic, saving on glass while giving Canadians their own distinct beer identity separate from American long necks. The satisfying weight in your palm, the way condensation beaded on that amber glass on hot summer days, the perfect stackability that made carrying a 2-4 to the cottage so much easier. These weren't just bottles, they were part of our collective rhythm. They survived in Canadian hands until 1984 when, like so many pieces of our culture, they were sacrificed on the altar of international standardization. Every Canadian of a certain age remembers that last summer of the stubby, backyard barbecues and beach parties, tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that something quintessentially ours was slipping away. You know, as we journey through these forgotten pieces of our past, I'd love for you to share your own memories in the comments. And if you're enjoying this nostalgic trip through Canada's 1960s, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our other explorations of Canada's overlooked history. Now, speaking of things that brought Canadians together, number 7 takes us down the aisles of a place that was once as Canadian as maple syrup: Dominion grocery stores. Mainly because of the meat wasn't just a slogan, it was practically a national mantra in the 1960s. Those distinctive red and yellow signs marked the weekly rhythm of Canadian family life, with Thursday night shopping being something of a suburban ritual. The butcher counters were theatrical performances. White-coated men with practiced hands, trimming cuts exactly to your mother's specifications, wrapping them in crisp white paper before adding that final piece of red Dominion tape. It wasn't self-service, it was service with personality, where the butcher knew your name and remembered that your family preferred a thicker cut of sirloin. The stores themselves had that unmistakable smell, a blend of fresh-cut meat, produce, floor wax, and those cardboard boxes of detergent stacked in towering displays. It wasn't just where you bought your groceries, it was where neighbors caught up, where mothers passed down shopping wisdom to daughters, where that special Saturday morning feeling lived when you'd tag along with Dad to pick up supplies for the weekend barbecue. The plastic S&H green stamps that came with purchases became a form of alternative currency, collected in books and redeemed for household treasures. A uniquely 1960s form of loyalty program that became a family project. At number 6, we find ourselves in living rooms across the country, where every Saturday afternoon Canadians settled in to watch a man who became an unlikely household name, Peter Whittle. His CBC program, Mr. Fix-It, launched in 1959 and throughout the 1960s, became the blueprint for how ordinary Canadians learned to work with their hands. Before YouTube tutorials, before Home Depot workshops, there was just Peter, patient, methodical, and reassuringly average in appearance, showing a nation how to build bookshelves, repair screen doors, and finish a basement rec room. Now, what's fascinating isn't just the show itself, but how it reflected Canada's unique post-war identity. Practical, unpretentious, and with that distinctly Canadian belief that you should probably figure out how to fix something yourself before calling for help. The show's humble workshop set, with its pegboard walls and carefully arranged tools, became the template for basement workshops from Halifax to Victoria. The smell of freshly cut pine, the gentle rasp of sandpaper, the precise tap-tap-tap of hammer on nail. These sensory memories connected generations. Fathers and sons would gather around black and white TV sets then head straight to the basement to try out what they'd learned. Women, too, found in Peter a teacher who didn't talk down to them, who made home maintenance accessible rather than mysterious. It wasn't just about home repairs, it was about a distinctly Canadian approach to self-sufficiency that shaped how we saw ourselves as a nation still defining its identity, one deck and picnic table at a time. Merci Euro. Number 5 might seem unexpected, but ask any Canadian who lived through the 1960s to sing the Tilden Rent-A-Car jingle and watch their face light up with recognition. When you need a car or truck, call Tilden for good luck. 345-555-55. Long before multinational rental companies dominated our airports, this proudly Canadian company created one of the most persistent earworms in Canadian advertising history. The simple, catchy melody first aired in 1962, composed by a young Toronto musician who was paid just $250 for what would become a cultural touchstone. It played on radio stations from coast to coast, usually during hockey broadcasts and evening news programs, media moments that united Canadians in the pre-cable 3-channel universe. The jingle's genius was in its simplicity and in the way the phone number was sung, making it impossible to forget when you actually needed to rent a vehicle. What made the Tilden phenomenon uniquely Canadian wasn't just the company itself, but how the jingle permeated our culture. It became shorthand for taking a special trip, for business travel when that was still considered glamorous, for family adventures. The distinctive yellowed Tilden locations with their bold black lettering were fixtures in Canadian cities. Their fleets of practical, family-friendly cars reflecting Canadian sensibilities rather than American flash. The company's promotional calendars hung in workshops and offices across the country, featuring iconic Canadian landscapes rather than the swimsuit models their American counterparts preferred. The jingle featured prominently at drive-in theaters across the country, where teenagers would sing along before the main feature, embedding itself into the collective memory of an entire generation. Tilden represented a time when Canadian companies could compete with their American counterparts by emphasizing their Canadian identity rather than hiding it, a confidence in our national character that somehow got lost in the decades that followed. At number 4, we confront a more complex piece of Canadian cultural history: Players Navy Cut cigarettes. Now, before we go further, I'm not glamorizing smoking, but we can't talk about 1960s Canada without acknowledging how these distinctive blue packages with the bearded sailor were woven into the fabric of everyday life. Created by British company John Player and Sons, but manufactured in Canada from the 1950s, Players became distinctly Canadian through clever marketing that tied them to our maritime heritage and working-class identity. The sailor on the package, with his weathered face and pipe, embodied a certain rugged Canadian self-image that resonated across the country, particularly with men who saw themselves as unpretentious and authentic. The brand's sponsorship of Canadian hockey teams and stock car races cemented its place in our cultural landscape, creating associations that went far beyond the product itself. My grandfather, a dock worker in Halifax, would describe the ritual importance of the smoke break. Those moments where deals were made, friendships formed, and the hierarchy of the workplace temporarily dissolved as men shared a light. The distinctive aroma of Players, stronger and more aromatic than American brands, could be found in Legion halls, hockey arenas, and fishing wharfs from coast to coast. Women, too, had their own relationship with Players, often choosing them precisely because they weren't marketed specifically to women with condescending, feminine packaging. The decline began with the first health warnings in 1963, but it was the changing cultural tides of the 1970s that truly spelled the end of this complicated piece of Canadiana. When I found one of my grandfather's old blue packs in his workshop after he passed, the smell instantly transported me back to those Sunday afternoons in his garage, watching him work while telling stories of the war. A bittersweet connection to a vanished era that contained both comfort and caution. Our third entry represents both the pinnacle and the heartbreak of 1960s Canadian innovation: the Clairton Project G Stereo. This wasn't just a sound system, It was a revolution in Canadian design and a symbol of our cultural coming of age. Created by Peter Monk and David Gilmour in Toronto in 1958, the iconic Clairtone, especially the spherical Project G model with its suspended speakers, became a global status symbol owned by Hugh Hefner, Oscar Peterson, and Frank Sinatra himself, who called it the sound of the future. The sleek walnut cabinets and space-age chrome details weren't just beautiful. They represented Canada stepping confidently onto the world stage of sophisticated design. These weren't appliances, but sculptures. Functional art that transformed Canadian living rooms while delivering unprecedented sound quality that made vinyl records come alive with warmth and depth. What made this so powerfully Canadian was that it represented our brief moment when we weren't just consuming American culture, but creating something uniquely ours that the world envied. My mother still talks about her family's Clairtone as if it were a member of the family. The walnut cabinet lovingly polished, the ritual of carefully placing vinyl on the turntable, the warm room-filling sound that made their modest Winnipeg living room feel somehow sophisticated and cosmopolitan. Neighborhood listening parties centered around these magnificent machines, where the latest Gordon Lightfoot or Joni Mitchell album would be experienced communally, the Clairtone revealing nuances lost on lesser systems. The company's spectacular rise and fall, from international design sensation to bankruptcy by 1972, mirrors a certain Canadian tendency to create brilliance, only to see it slip away. When the Nova Scotia plant closed, it wasn't just jobs that were lost, but a bold vision of what Canadian innovation could be. As we approach our top spot, number 2 takes us on the road that literally united a nation. The completion of the Trans-Canada Highway in 1962. It's easy to forget now, but before this 7,821-kilometer ribbon of asphalt, the idea of driving across Canada was more dream than reality. The highway wasn't just an engineering achievement. It fundamentally changed how Canadians saw their own country and their place within it. Suddenly, a family in Ontario could practically imagine driving to the Rocky Mountains for summer vacation, or maritime residents could plan a journey to Quebec City or Montreal without elaborate ferry arrangements and dubious rural roads. The distinctive white-on-green TCH shields became symbols of adventure and national unity, modest markers of an immodest achievement that conquered our vast geography and severe climate. The 1960s became the golden age of the Canadian road trip, with families packing station wagons and setting off to discover their country in ways previous generations never could. My father still talks about the summer of '65 when his family drove from Toronto to Vancouver, sleeping in roadside motels with names like the Maple Leaf Inn and Northern Lights Motor Court, each with their distinctive neon signs and Canada-shaped pools. The highway created its own culture. Those Esso stations with their "put a tiger in your tank" promotions, the roadside diners serving butter tarts and yellow pea soup, the quirky attractions like the giant nickel in Sudbury or the world's largest Easter egg in Vegreville. There was something profoundly democratic about the highway, accessible to almost everyone regardless of income, creating shared experiences that crossed class boundaries. What's been forgotten isn't the highway itself, but how it changed us, transforming Canada from a loose collection of regions into a place you could actually experience as a whole. The sense of possibility it created, the way it democratized travel for ordinary Canadians, and how it gave us a shared vocabulary of places and experiences that transcended our regional identities. These are the intangible legacies that deserve remembering and celebrating. And finally, our number 1 spot goes to something that exists today but has been fundamentally transformed from its 1960s origins: the original Tim Hortons donut shops. Yes, the name continues, but what's been lost is profound. When hockey player Tim Horton and business partner Jim Sherrod opened their first store in Hamilton in 1964, they created something that would become more than a business. It would become part of the Canadian identity. The original shops, with their distinctive turquoise color scheme, counter seating, and simple menu of 24 donut varieties handmade on premises, daily created a uniquely Canadian third place. Not home, not work, but somewhere equally essential to community life. The air inside was a heavenly mix of frying dough, brewing coffee, and conversation. A sensory experience entirely different from today's standardized operations. The Dutchie, the apple fritter, and yes, those honey-dipped donuts weren't just treats. They were affordable luxuries that transcended class boundaries. The distinctive coffee, served in thick ceramic mugs that working men would cradle in winter-chilled hands, became liquid comfort through Canadian winters. What made the original Tim's special wasn't efficiency or consistency. It was authenticity and connection. Bakers worked through the night in full view of late customers, creating a theatrical element to production. Watching those skilled hands roll, cut, and shape dough was mesmerizing. A craft performed with pride rather than a process to be optimized and hidden away. What we've truly lost isn't the brand name, but the culture those original shops created, where shift workers gathered at dawn, where hockey teams celebrated after games, where police officers and construction workers and office clerks all sat at the same counter. My grandmother tells stories of Friday mornings in the 1960s when the women in her neighborhood would gather at the local Tim's after dropping kids at school. A rare moment of adult conversation and community in their busy lives. Unlike the drive-through culture of today, the original Tim Hortons required you to stop, sit down, and inevitably engage with your community, creating countless small moments of connection that helped define who we were as Canadians. Looking back at all 8 of these forgotten pieces of 1960s Canada, from the stubby beer bottle to the original Tim Hortons, what emerges isn't just nostalgia for things that have disappeared, but a recognition of how they shaped our national character. They represent a time when Canada was creating its own distinct identity, separate from Britain and the United States. Practical, unpretentious, community-minded, and built to endure our unique geography and climate. In today's world where global brands and digital experiences increasingly erase national differences, these lost pieces of Canadiana remind us of a time when the things we created, consumed, and cherished were distinctly ours. They weren't just products or places. They were expressions of who we were becoming as a nation, finding its voice in the modern world. So, the next time you pass a Tim Hortons drive-thru or travel the Trans-Canada Highway, take a moment to remember their origins and raise a coffee cup, even if it's paper now rather than ceramic, to the forgotten Canada that created them.